They said he was disrespectful, disruptive, uncontrollable, all before he was even 13. The teachers called it attitude. The principal called it a problem. But he called it what it really was, speaking up. And in 8th grade, when he finally stood his ground and refused to apologize for a comment taken out of context, his teacher, Mrs. Elkins, sent him to detention, wrote him up for insubordination, and told the office, "If this boy doesn't learn how to behave, he's never going anywhere." That moment stayed with him for the rest of his life, not because of the punishment but because of the silence that followed. No one asked him what happened. No one asked why he spoke. No one cared about his side. Just a mark on his record, a warning in his file, and another young black kid labeled difficult. But what no one knew that day, not the teachers, not the office, and especially not Mrs. Elkins, was that the same student they dismissed would one day walk back into that school, not as a kid, not as a problem, but as a decision maker. The tables would turn. And the one who sent him to detention would soon be answering to him. It started, like most stories of transformation, with anger. Not loud, fists on the desk kind of anger, but the quiet kind that burns under the surface for years. The kind that simmers when you hear teachers talk down to students who look like you. The kind that stirs when your voice is treated as noise. In high school he kept his head down. Not because he stopped resisting, but because he learned that in this world, strategy was louder than shouting. He got involved in student government, took debate, volunteered for tutoring programs, even ran a small lunchtime reading club for underclassmen. His way of pushing back, not with confrontation but with leadership. College wasn't a question. Was a mission. He majored in political science, minored in education, and returned every summer to his hometown to intern at local offices, youth centers, and eventually with a nonprofit that focused on educational equity for underserved communities. That's when he saw it. The same patterns recycled again and again. Disproportionate discipline. Biased expectations. Kids labeled defiant for asking honest questions. And at the root of it, policy. Decisions made in boardrooms by people who had no idea what it meant to sit in a classroom and feel unseen. He told himself then, "One day I'm going to be in that room." And he meant it. 5 years after college, he returned to his hometown permanently. A full-time job at a civic engagement nonprofit turned into a position on the city's Youth Engagement Committee, then the Education Advisory Council. People noticed him, not just for what he said but how he said it. Measured, direct, rooted in lived experience. He wasn't a loud voice in the crowd. He was a scalpel cutting through noise. Then came the moment, an open seat on the school board. 3-term incumbent retiring. No clear favorite to fill it. Everyone said it would take money, connections, a name. He had none of those. Just his story, his work, and the truth. He launched his campaign from the local library meeting room with $600, a stack of flyers, and a few committed friends who had also once been those kids, the ones sent to the office for being too much. They knocked on doors, made videos, went viral on local Facebook groups. His campaign slogan was simple: from the classroom to the boardroom, time for change. It resonated. Because people remembered him. They remembered the kid who challenged the system from inside it. Parents, especially from marginalized communities, rallied behind him. And in a stunning upset he won. By 238 votes. Board member. Official. Seat at the table. It was a triumph. But also the beginning. Because guess who was still at the school? Mrs. Elkins. Now in her 60s, tenured, respected by many, still teaching 8th grade social studies. Still sharp-tongued. Still strict. Still talking about discipline and respect, in the same tone she once used to shut him down. The first time she saw him again it was surreal. A board meeting. She was there with other faculty seated in the audience. He walked past her. She did a double take. He nodded. She blinked. No words exchanged. But the air between them shifted, like past and present had collided in real time. Over the next several months he dove into the work. Policies, budgets, curriculum reform. He joined the Discipline Policy Review Committee, specifically to address racial disparities in suspensions and detentions. The data was damning. Black and brown students were being written up 3x more than white students for defiance and talking back. The same vague categories that had followed him through school. He drafted a policy proposal. Require specific language in disciplinary write-ups. Mandate restorative justice training for all staff. Launch a review process for repeat write-up patterns. Provide students a written right to appeal any classroom-level discipline. The proposal shook things. Teachers' union reps pushed back. Some said it tied teachers' hands. Others said it would encourage disrespect. But he didn't back down. "We're not tying hands," he said at one meeting. "We're asking for accountability. We're saying the classroom isn't a courtroom, and students aren't criminals for disagreeing." The most resistance came from Mrs. Elkins. She attended a policy hearing, signed up to speak, took the mic, looked him dead in the eye. "I understand the intentions of this proposal," she said, "but we also need to understand that when students refuse to follow directions, it disrupts learning for everyone. Teachers need the authority to maintain order. Without it, we fail all our students." Was déjà vu. Her tone hadn't changed. The message hadn't changed. But this time the power dynamic had. He took a breath, then asked her publicly, "Mrs. Elkins, do you believe that all students have an equal voice in the classroom?" She hesitated. "Yes." He followed up. "Even if their tone is strong? Even if they challenge your authority?" She fumbled. "Well, there's a difference between questions and disruption." He didn't smile, didn't flinch, just replied calmly. "And that difference is often determined by the teacher's perception. Which is exactly why this policy matters." That moment hit hard. It trended locally. Parents shared the clip. Former students started chiming in online. "She did the same thing to me. She called me aggressive for asking a question. Finally someone's saying it." But things got even more personal. A week later, his office received an anonymous tip, alleging that Mrs. Elkins had, within the past month, issued 3 classroom detentions for disrespect that were not properly documented, including to one student who claimed they were punished after pointing out a historical inaccuracy in class. He requested an internal review. Standard procedure. Nothing punitive yet. But word got out. And suddenly, people were talking, not just about the policy but about her. Whispers spread. Old colleagues defended her. Former students started telling stories. Board members became cautious. And behind it all, quietly, Mrs. Elkins requested a closed-door meeting with him. No media. No staff. Just the two of them. The date was set. Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. In the very same conference room where teachers once reviewed his write-ups as a student. And as he walked into the room that day, Mrs. Elkins already seated with a folder in her lap, eyes unreadable, she looked at him and said, "You don't know the full story. About that detention. About me. About what really happened that day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths." She sat with her back straight, both hands resting on a folder that looked older than most of the policies they were currently reviewing on the board. Her voice wasn't sharp this time, it was low, steady, maybe even a little tired. "You don't know the full story. About that detention. About me. About what really happened that day." He didn't respond immediately. He sat across from her, folded his hands and waited. This wasn't the classroom anymore. It wasn't her asking questions. It was him offering space, for truth or for excuses. That was up to her. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, disciplinary slips, class rosters, and old incident report. "This is from your file," she said. "The day you got detention. The day you said I silenced you." He didn't flinch. "I didn't say you silenced me. I said you punished me for speaking up." She paused, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. But there's more to it." She slid a paper across the table. "That day you weren't the only one written up." He glanced at the document. Another student's name. Another incident report. Same day, same class. Different reason. He cursed at another student. He was disciplined quietly. "You, on the other hand, stood up, challenged what I said in front of the whole class and refused to sit down." It felt like mutiny. He raised an eyebrow. "Mutiny? I know how that sounds," she said quickly. "But at the time it wasn't just about you speaking. It was about losing control of the room. About fear. About being overwhelmed." He leaned forward. "Then why did you write me up and not him?" She looked at him. The moment hung heavy. "I don't know," she finally said. "Maybe I saw more in you. Maybe I expected better. Or maybe I reacted out of my own bias. I've spent years thinking about it. You weren't wrong that day. but I wasn't ready to hear it. He let the silence settle. This wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was something. What changed? He asked. You did, she replied. You came back. You didn't burn the school down. You didn't disappear. You didn't turn into the warning I once gave the office. You became someone who makes change. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I think I owe you the truth. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Not yet. Because the truth wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Outside that closed room, the board was still debating the discipline reform proposal. Teachers' unions were threatening to stall the process. The local paper was now covering the story of the board's divisive new policy, and in online comment sections things were turning ugly. Anonymous posts attacking his credentials. Comments about how kids need to respect their elders. Even subtle accusations of being anti-teacher. Then came the email. From a former student. Name redacted. Sent from a burner account. Subject line, Mrs. Elkins is hiding more than that detention. Message. You're not the only one she targeted. I was in her class in 2016. I filed a complaint. It disappeared. I never heard back. Thought about it for years. Now that I see what you're doing, I think it's time someone reopened that file. Check the HR archives. If they haven't been cleaned. He stared at the screen. That word, disappeared, stuck with him. He met with the board's legal advisor the next day. Quietly requested access to HR complaint archives from the past 10 years. Policy allowed it, with board approval. But the HR director hesitated. That's a lot of files, she said. Do you know what you're looking for? He nodded. Yes. I want to know how many formal student complaints were filed about Mrs. Elkins. And what happened to them. She froze. You're opening a door that's been locked a long time. Then I want the key. 2 days later he received the files. Redacted. But readable. There were 3 complaints. All between 2013 and 2018. All from Black or Latino students. All involving classroom discipline. And all unresolved. The pattern was clear. The students had filed written statements, citing public humiliation, singling out, retaliation for questioning authority. In each case, the complaint ended with the same phrase, no further action taken. No corroborating evidence. Except, one of the files contained a handwritten note from another teacher. A witness. Someone who had written, this isn't the first time I've seen Elkins lose control when students challenge her. It's not about behavior, it's about power. The note was unsigned. Just a first name, Karen. He knew that name. Miss Karen Singh. Retired last year. He called her. She answered. Surprised but cordial. When he asked about the note, she went silent. Then whispered, I thought they destroyed that file. They didn't, he said. And now I need your help. Miss Singh agreed to meet. They sat in a coffee shop outside town. She brought copies of her personal journal entries, pages written during her years at the school. She had kept notes. Names. Dates. Incidents. She slid one page across the table. Read. March 4, 2016. Elkins berated JG in front of class. Student corrected her about a civil rights date. She accused him of disrespect. I saw fear in his eyes. Like he knew the moment he spoke he'd be punished. I reported it. The principal told me to let it go. He read it twice. Then asked, would you testify if needed? Miss Singh nodded. I'm tired of staying quiet. Things moved quickly after that. He called an emergency ethics meeting of the board. Presented the pattern. The archived complaints. The testimony. The journals. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. About whether the people in front of students were being held to the same standards the system demanded of those students. The board was split. Some members pushed to open a formal investigation. Others hesitated, worried about the optics. She's close to retirement, one said. This will blow back on the board. But he stood firm. This isn't about her retirement. It's about every student who learned that speaking up gets punished, not heard. We tell our kids to find their voice. We owe them teachers who won't silence it. Then came the backlash. A petition circulated, started by parents loyal to Elkins. Keep politics out of the classroom. Hundreds of signatures. Local news outlets picked it up. A segment aired with a headline, Respected Educator Targeted by School Board Rookie. And then someone leaked a rumor that he had personal motivation for the investigation, that he was using his board seat for revenge. The next morning, his email inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, many accusatory. One said, "Funny how the same kid who cried about discipline is now abusing power." Another, "Bet you're just mad she made you follow rules like everyone else." And one, that stood out, "Careful board member." Elkins wasn't the only one in that room back then. Some of us remember more than you think. And not all of it makes you look like the hero. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. The message kept playing in his head, "Some of us remember more than you think. And not all of it makes you look like the hero." The phrasing wasn't random. It was deliberate. A threat wrapped in nostalgia. And it worked, because it sent him digging into his own memory, questioning the very thing that brought him this far. His story. His version of what happened that day in 8th grade. He had never doubted it. Until now. He sat alone in his apartment that night, pulling out a small box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were old report cards, class photos, scribbled notes from friends. At the bottom, buried under years of dust and history, was the original detention slip, the one Mrs. Elkins gave him. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was hers. Read. Student refused to stop challenging instructional material. Raised voice. Created disruption. It didn't sound explosive. But it also didn't sound like what he remembered. He flipped it over. There in the margin was a faint pencil line. Another name. A witness, Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark had been the assistant social studies teacher that year. A quiet man. Mostly forgettable. But now critical. He spent the next day tracking him down. After a dozen calls, a librarian from his old middle school finally gave him a lead. He moved to Arizona a few years back, teaching night classes at a community college. He called. Left a message. Then another. Finally, Clark picked up. The man sounded older, slower but sharp. "I figured someone would reach out someday," he said. "You want to know what really happened in that room, don't you?" He nodded even though Clark couldn't see him. "Yes. I need the truth. For more reasons than one." There was a pause. Then Clark said, "You didn't start it. You were reacting to what she said." He froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Elkins made a statement about civil disobedience, called it unproductive. You raised your hand. You brought up Rosa Parks. She dismissed you. You stood up. You didn't yell. You quoted Dr. King. She said, 'This isn't a place for speeches.' That's when she wrote the slip." The memory hit him like a wave. He had blocked it out, the detail. The quote. "This isn't a place for speeches." That had been the moment. The exact second he felt his voice taken from him. Again. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked Clark. "I was a new hire," Clark replied. "She was tenured. The principal warned me not to make waves. But I always regretted it." "Would you be willing to write a statement?" "Yes," Clark said. "More than that, I'll testify if needed." "You deserve clarity." That clarity changed everything. He submitted the new statement to the ethics subcommittee. With Ms. Singh's journal and Clark's affidavit, there was now enough evidence to formally escalate the investigation into a full disciplinary review. Mrs. Elkins would have to answer to the board. The date was set. The town was now split, literally. Local parents were attending board meetings in droves. Some held signs defending Elkins. Others supported the reform. Local TV crews were showing up. Reporters asked him for comment on whether the board was pushing out a beloved educator due to ideological disagreement. He refused to take the bait. "This is about patterns," he told one interviewer. "Not politics." But then everything got more complicated. At the height of the controversy, someone leaked photos, old yearbook pictures from middle school. And in one of them he was captured in a school hallway, pushing another student. The picture was grainy but the posture was clear. Arm outstretched. Another boy recoiling. He had no memory of it. No idea where it came from. But the caption under the leak read, "This is your board member, bullying kids before calling it justice." It exploded online. Local blogs called it a bombshell. Right-wing commentators in neighboring districts picked it up. "Is this the future of school leadership?" they mocked. He sat in his car that night staring at the photo. It looked bad. But something about it didn't add up. He never remembered being violent. He couldn't even recall the boy in the photo. So he did what he always did when things didn't make sense. He looked deeper. He contacted a friend who had access to old school archives. After some digging, they found the original incident report from that year. The photo was real, but the context had been erased. The student in the photo had been bullying a younger girl for weeks. He'd stepped in to defend her. There was never a write-up. In fact, the guidance counselor had praised him for it. But the cropped photo had removed the girl from the frame and twisted the story. He released a public statement. "Context matters," he said in a recorded video. "And sometimes systems erase context to control narratives. That's why I fight for students who are misrepresented, misunderstood, and mislabeled. I won't be silenced by the same tricks I grew up fighting against." The video went viral. Support poured in. Even some who had defended Elkins began rethinking their stance. But behind the scenes, something darker was happening. He received an anonymous envelope. No return address. Inside was a copy of his permanent student file, not just from middle school but elementary too. At the bottom of the stack was a memo marked "Confidential." It was dated 3 years before his detention with Elkins. A counselor had written, "Student shows signs of oppositional behavior. Suggest flagging for intervention. Likely to challenge authority." He was 8 when they wrote that. And the memo had followed him through every grade, quietly shaping how teachers saw him, even before he opened his mouth. He realized then, it had never been about one moment. It had been baked into the system, into the files, into the language that schools used to describe kids like him. Curious became defiant. Assertive became aggressive. Leadership became trouble. And now, decades later, he was still cleaning up the legacy of a label that was never meant to help him. He brought the memo to the next board meeting. Read it aloud. Held it up. "This," he said, "is how students are silently sentenced before they ever get a chance to prove who they really are." A silence fell over the room. Even Mrs. Elkins, seated in the back, looked down at the floor. But just when it seemed like he had finally gained the upper hand, just when justice felt within reach, another board member leaned over, handed him her phone, and whispered, "You need to see this." He looked. On the screen was a breaking news alert. "Breaking. Lawsuit filed against school board over ethics violation. Anonymous claim alleges board member used confidential files to push personal agenda." And under it, his name. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. He stared at the screen, reading the headline over and over. "Lawsuit filed against school board over ethics violation. Anonymous claim alleges board member used confidential files to push personal agenda." And below it, bold and unmistakable, his name. In one moment the narrative had flipped. He wasn't the reformer anymore. Now they were painting him as the manipulator, the one abusing his position. And just like that, the walls started to close in. He stepped outside the boardroom, phone in hand, the air suddenly thick and heavy. He tried to breathe, to think, to make sense of how everything had shifted so fast. His inbox was exploding. Local reporters were already emailing for comment. The board's legal counsel was trying to reach him. And on social media, hashtags were forming. Hashtag bias on the board, hashtag abuse of power, hashtag agenda not accountability. But the worst part? He hadn't leaked anything. He'd followed protocol, submitted his request through the proper channels, and stayed within the board's internal ethics procedures. If confidential files had been leaked to the public, it wasn't him who did it. And yet, someone was making it look like he had. By the next morning, the board had called an emergency closed session meeting. Only members, legal counsel, and the superintendent would be present. The goal: determine whether his actions had violated the board's code of ethics. He walked into the room and immediately felt it, the tension, the doubt. Members who had once backed him now sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. The superintendent opened the meeting. "We've received a formal complaint, backed by a legal filing, alleging misuse of student records and breach of confidentiality. The claimant is anonymous, for now, but the law firm representing them is real. And they're demanding your immediate suspension pending investigation." He leaned forward. "Who submitted the file I'm being accused of leaking?" The superintendent hesitated, then pulled up an internal log on the screen. According to our records, the student files you presented were pulled through a standard board request, but copies were also downloaded to a personal USB device registered to your login credentials. His mouth went dry. I never used a USB drive. Then someone used your account, the superintendent said. Or your computer. That's when it hit him. He remembered it. 2 weeks ago, during a break in a committee meeting, he'd left his laptop unattended in the board office for nearly 20 minutes. It had been unlocked. Open. And anyone could have used it. He looked around the room. Someone here had set him up. He turned to the legal advisor. I want a forensic audit of my account access. And I want to know which IP address downloaded that file. The board voted to approve it, reluctantly. But even with that investigation pending, the damage was done. A local parents group, already hostile toward his discipline reform efforts, filed a petition demanding his resignation. Their argument? He had a personal vendetta against Mrs. Elkins and used student records to smear her name. Meanwhile, Mrs. Elkins stayed silent. She made no public comment. She didn't attend the next board meeting. But her absence spoke volumes. People took it as victimhood. As proof she was being unfairly targeted. Her allies began circling wagons. They framed the entire issue as a crusade, one man's emotional revenge, not structural reform. And yet the students kept coming. He began receiving handwritten letters, some anonymous, some signed, from former students. Dozens of them. Some recounted experiences of humiliation in her class. Some praised her, yes. But others revealed something darker. One letter stood out. It was from a former student named RM class of 2014. She told me I'd never amount to anything because I didn't know how to stay in my place. I recorded it. My mom tried to take it to the school. The principal told her, that's just how Elkins talks. We transferred schools a month later. A recording? He emailed the sender back, cautiously, respectfully, asking if the file still existed. The reply came an hour later. One audio file. Time-stamped. Dated. He pressed play. The voice was unmistakably Elkins. This isn't a place for debate. If you can't stay in your place, you'll end up nowhere. There are rules in this world. If you don't follow them, people like you get eaten alive. That last sentence echoed like thunder. He shared it with legal counsel. They verified the file's authenticity and date. It had never been submitted to the school. The student's mother had been discouraged. Silenced. Just like him. But the board still wasn't moving fast enough. Every step he took forward, the backlash doubled. The ethics review panel delayed their vote. The superintendent advised him to lay low. And rumors were now spreading that the lawsuit's anonymous claimant had inside information, possibly even another board member. It all pointed to one conclusion. Someone on the inside was actively trying to destroy his credibility before the full truth came out. Then came the call. It was Miss Singh, his retired former teacher, the one who had written the original journal entries about Elkins. Her voice was trembling. I wasn't going to tell you this, she said, but I think you need to know. Right before I left the district, someone from the administrative office told me quietly that certain files on Elkins had been flagged years ago, but were buried. Buried by who? He asked. By the superintendent, she said. Back then he was head of HR. He protected her. Told us all not to escalate complaints. Said she was too valuable to lose. His mind raced. That meant the very person overseeing the investigation now had once covered for her. He hung up the phone and stared at the wall, the pieces falling into place like shards of a broken mirror. This wasn't just about a detention slip. This wasn't just about Elkins. This was about a system, a full chain of protection, silence, and suppression. One that extended far beyond a single classroom. And now, with the lawsuit moving forward, the board fractured, and the public watching every move, he had to make a decision. Would he step back and let the process play out? Or blow the lid off everything, and risk losing it all? That night he sat at his desk and opened a blank email. Subject line, public statement, to be read at next board meeting. He began to type. There is something the public deserves to know. Not just about one teacher, but about the culture that has enabled harm to go unchecked. I have the proof, and I'm ready to release it. But before he could hit send, his phone buzzed again. This time it was from a private number. A voice message. No transcript. Just audio. He played it. A man's voice. Calm. Confident. Unfamiliar. If you release that statement, we'll release what we have on you. We know about your cousin. About the cover-up. You want to burn the house down? Careful you don't get caught in the fire. He froze. His blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that name, his cousin's name, in years. And what cover-up were they talking about? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. He replayed the voicemail a dozen times, each word sinking deeper than the last. If you release that statement, we'll release what we have on you. We know about your cousin. About the cover-up. You want to burn the house down? Careful you don't get caught in the fire. The voice was distorted, anonymous, but the message was clear. Someone had reached into his past and found a thread they thought they could pull to unravel him. And worse, they believed he had something to hide. He sat alone in his kitchen, the laptop glowing dimly beside him, cursor blinking on the drafted statement he'd almost sent to the entire board. But now, a single question consumed him. What did they think they knew? He thought back to his cousin Jalen. They'd grown up like brothers. Rough neighborhood. Same school system. But different stories. Where he got pushed to be better, Jalen got labeled lost. He'd been suspended 3 times by 9th grade. In 10th, arrested. In 12th, expelled. There was one incident he remembered vividly. A fight in the cafeteria. Jalen had thrown the first punch, but only after weeks of being provoked by another student, a known bully. No one ever mentioned the bullying. Just the punch. At the time, he'd tried to advocate for his cousin. Even went to the principal's office with a written statement. But the office secretary told him, "This is above your pay grade, kid." His statement never made it into Jalen's file. Jalen ended up in a juvenile program, then in the system, then gone. For years he'd carried the guilt, wondering if he could have done more. And now someone had found that silence. That one piece of his past he wished he'd fought harder to change, and they were going to use it against him. Unless he spoke first. The next board meeting was packed wall to wall. News cameras, local activists, angry parents, supportive students. It had become more than a meeting. It was an event. Mrs. Elkins was there too, seated quietly beside her lawyer. The superintendent opened the floor. He stood, took the mic, and for a moment just stared at the crowd. No notes. No script. "I was going to come here tonight and make a case," he began. "Lay out timelines, quotes, policies. But I think we've all heard enough policy." He held up a folder. Inside, the old detention slip, Clark's testimony, Ms. Singh's journals, student letters, the recording of Elkin's voice. "I could read all of this to you. But instead, I'm going to tell you something no one expected to hear. Something someone tried to blackmail me into hiding." The room fell still. He took a breath. My cousin Jalen was expelled in his senior year. He got caught in a fight. But what no one saw, what no one cared to investigate, was that he was being harassed for months before that moment. I tried to help him. I wrote a statement. I gave it to the office. And it was thrown out. He paused. Maybe they didn't think a black kid defending another black kid was worth documenting. Maybe they thought we were just trouble. But that silence, that erasure, follows us. He raised his voice. Because that's what this is about. Not one teacher. Not one student. It's about a system that quietly labels, silences, and discards kids based on who they are and how loud they speak. He turned to Elkins. "You told me years ago, this isn't a place for speeches. But you were wrong. This is exactly the place for them." He laid the folder on the table. "I release everything to the public. No redactions. No spin. Because if speaking the truth burns this place down, then maybe it needed to catch fire." A gasp rippled through the room. One board member stood. Then another. And another. A vote was called. The motion to launch a full independent investigation into the conduct of Mrs. Elkins passed 5-2. But that wasn't the end. Because a week later the forensic audit returned. Someone had downloaded the student files onto a USB, using his credentials, but from an IP address that didn't match his device. The timestamp? 11:24 a.m. The day he left his laptop alone during a break. Cross-referenced footage from the building's security system showed another board member, the vice chair, entering the room alone for 15 minutes. She had been Elkin's close friend for 20 years. And the anonymous lawsuit? Withdrawn the moment the audit report was made public. With pressure mounting, Elkins resigned before the investigation concluded. The vice chair stepped down days later. But the system didn't crumble, it began to rebuild. The district launched a formal review of disciplinary policies. Old complaint archives were reopened. A student advisory committee was formed. And perhaps most importantly, the board voted to remove biased student behavior labels from permanent records unless reviewed by an oversight panel. He sat in the same boardroom months later watching new teachers undergo equity training using his case as a model. And for the first time the silence was broken. Not just for him, but for every kid who had ever been told they were too loud, too difficult, too much. Power doesn't always come from position, it comes from persistence. Systems often protect themselves, not the people they serve. But when someone who was once silenced finds the courage to speak, they don't just change the narrative, they change the system. Never underestimate the impact of one voice unwilling to stay quiet. Because what we challenge today shapes who gets heard tomorrow. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths.